that light. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Daniel Buxton. I'm the former president of the Bullitt County Geological Society. I was the president for 3 years, vice president for 2 years. I'm currently a volunteer over at the Bullitt County History Museum. If you haven't been, it's over here in the courthouse. Research room is on the top floor, and we got 2 display rooms on the bottom floor. We've recently, in the last year, we've added a whole lot of new stuff in the hallways, and so we're getting ready to add a couple more new things. So we've got a lot of really exciting stuff going on over there. Today we're going to talk about the formation of Kentucky and Bullitt County. And it's kind of going to be just a brief overview, kind of want you to think back to when Kentucky, because we're going to be talking about before Kentucky was ever a state. So it was just you've been right here where we are now, been nothing but woods and forests. And you had these brave people that came from Virginia and from the east to see what was here. And so that's what we're going to talk about. And one of the other things I want to mention as I'm going through this presentation is that I kind of did this in a way that you could understand. If you ever done genealogy or researched your family tree, when you go looking for records at the courthouse, like deeds or anything like that, you have to know the timeline. You have to know what was going on, because we're going to start talking about, Kentucky was originally part of Virginia. And so if you want to go back to that period and you're looking for some kind of land record, well, it's not going to be here in Kentucky. It's going to be in Virginia because it was the state of Virginia back then. So it's important to know Virginia laid claim to what is now Kentucky in 1634. They laid claim to the land in 1634. Is when they laid what is Kentucky. And you'll see I've got some maps coming up to show you. Modern-day Kentucky in 1720 became known as Spotsylvania County, Virginia. What is Kentucky was one huge county of Virginia, and it changed names. As you'll see, it changed names quite a few times. I'm not sure why, but they kept changing the name. In 1734, it became known as Orange County, Virginia. Here's a map, 1738 map of Kentucky, or what this portion where it says Augusta, 1738. That is that part with the lines. That's actually Kentucky, and this down here, I think, is Virginia. But that was an early map of what Kentucky looked like before it became a state. And it was known, it went from Orange County to Augusta County. 1750s and 1760s, this was when the first white settlers came to Kentucky. Before then, of course, there were Indians, Native Americans. But this was when the first white settlers started coming this direction to explore. And an interesting thing, I just got back from a vacation two weeks ago. We went down to Cumberland Gap, Cumberland Falls, and we were checking out some historical sites while we were down there, and we kind of just on a whim went to this one, and I thought, it's just perfect for the presentation I'm doing. This was a Dr. Thomas Walker Historical Society. This is a replica of the first cabin that was built in the state of Kentucky. This is in Barterville, Kentucky, and it's just north of the Cumberland Gap. And what happened was Dr. Thomas and his friends, they came from Virginia, but they came through the Cumberland Gap into Kentucky, and they were coming up, and they were exploring. And they got to this point, they claimed that land, they built a little cabin. They didn't stay there, though. They didn't stay there very long. They ended up leaving. They had some troubles, and they ended up leaving. But this is supposed to be a replica of the very first cabin that was built, the very first home that was built in the state of Kentucky.
The Thomas Walker is one of my ancestors.
Cool.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is.
1770, you can see the map. Now you can kind of plainly see Kentucky as almost as it is today. And it was known as, I'm not sure how you say that, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it, but you can see it was changed and had a different county name. But now Kentucky's actually starting to get its shape in how it is today. 1770s is when the first permanent white settlers came here. People like Adam Shepherd came a little bit later, but Henry Christ and some of the early settlers that came here started to come about that time. 1772, between 1772 and 76, Kentucky is now known as Fincastle County. And you can see it's basically by that time is kind of how it is today. The borders were how it is today. Then it became, between 1776 and 1780, it became known as Kentucky County. That's when it got its name. In 1780, they split up the Kentucky County into some of the counties we have today: Jefferson County, Lincoln County, Fayette County. And you can see how big they were. The original counties were pretty big, and they encompassed a lot of area. And Lincoln County, down there, that big Lincoln County, that's where Abraham Lincoln was, that's where Adam Shepherd, the founder of Shepherdsville, that's where him and his wife were married. They were married in Lincoln County, when they came here, they were married in that big section called Lincoln County there. Between 1784 and 1792, I didn't know this till recently, and I thought it was interesting. The residents of Kentucky, they got together and they had conventions because they wanted to be their own state. They wanted their independence from Virginia. And they had 10 separate conventions over that period of time and requested to become a state. And every time they were rejected until finally on the 10th time, Virginia agreed and the United States agreed. On the 9th time, the United States actually rejected it. Virginia had agreed, and the United States rejected them becoming a state. So it wasn't until the 10th convention and the 10th time that they finally got their statehood. December 18, 1789, Virginia gave its consent for Kentucky to become a state. Excuse me. February 4, 1781, the United States Congress gave its approval for Kentucky to become a state. And on June 1st, 1792, Kentucky became a state. This map is circa 1793. It's one of the earliest known, I believe, one of the earliest known maps of Kentucky. And if you could see it, if you could really look at it, you can see the salt works and some of the things that are here in Bullitt County on it. It shows it. Not much, but a few things. All right, now we're going to talk about the formation of Bullitt County. And when you talk about the formation of Bullitt County, you've got to realize what brought everybody to Bullitt County. Bullitt County was popular. A lot of people came here. And the reason was salt. Back at that time, you're talking about the early 1700s, salt was not easy to find like it is today. We can go buy however much salt we need in the store. They didn't have it like that. And they needed salt to preserve their meats and different things, to keep it, because they didn't have freezers either, and salt's what preserved it. And so, one of the earliest settlers, earliest settlers that came here, they found salt licks. What a salt lick is, and we still have them here today. I mean, you can still find them here today in Bullitt County. The ones I've seen are kind of just a circle in the ground. It's kind of muddy. Grass never grows there. Weeds, nothing grows there. And you can see the salt just kind of on top of the mud. Sometimes you can't, but a lot of times you can see the salt just kind of laying on top of the mud. And the animals are drawn to that. The deer and all the animals will come and they'll eat that salt. You know, they like that salt. And that's why we were so popular. That's why everybody started coming to Bullitt County. One of the first people to visit Bullitt County was Captain Thomas Bullitt. The Bullitt, I think it's Alexander Bullitt was who Bullitt County was named after. But he came here, he was the first to survey Bullitt's Lick, which is out off of 44. If you go out 44, you're right there across from the Bullitt's Lick Baptist Church. There's a historical marker. And back in there is where the original salt licks were, where they had the original salt kettles and where they made all the salt. And he was one of the first ones to find the salt lick. Well, once he found it, people started coming in because they wanted that salt. Henry Christ, I don't have him on here, but Henry Christ was one who got very heavily involved in the salt when he got here. November 13, 1779, Colonel William Fleming documented the salt works in his journal. This green book here, if you don't have it, you want to know about Bullitt County history, this is an excellent book and it's very cheap. Has some of his journal entries in here, a couple of his journal entries about the salt works. When he came, he found the salt works and stuff. And so he was, this is a painting done by a lady. She donated these to the museum of what her conception of what the salt works look like. They weren't exactly like this, but this is pretty close. They had the kettles lined up, they boiled the salt, and they boil it down, boil it until they had nothing left but that salt at the bottom of the kettle. But it was a big operation, it was a huge operation. It wasn't just, this here just shows a few kettles. I mean, it was huge, it was much bigger than this. And this was the main industry here, one of the main industries of Bullitt County in the early history of Bullitt County. Bullitt County, when people started coming here, they discovered the salt works and people started coming. You have to remember at that time there were Native Americans and it was not safe to live in your own house. And so what they would do is they would build these forts. And Brashear Station was one of them. There's a list of them there. Bullitt's Lick, Garrison, O'Dowell Station, Clear Station, Long Lick. Long Lick was a salt works. Vance Lick was a salt works. Fort Nonsense and Paraclet Spring was also a salt works. But they would live in these little communities. And they had the forts. They would live. They build the forts and live in the forts because they had to do that for safety. And Adam Shepard, who I'm going to talk about in a minute, and Benjamin Pope were the first two to actually build their own homes and live outside the safety of the fort here in Bullitt County. June 30th, 1780, Jefferson County, Virginia is formed and contains modern-day Bullitt County. As you can see up there, Jefferson County, that was in that area is where Bullitt County would be today. But Jefferson County was formed in 1780. May 1st, 1786, Nelson County was created. When Nelson County was created, Bullitt County, what is Bullitt County, was now in Nelson County. So when you're doing genealogy, when you're talking about the early 1700s or the late 1700s, you'd have to go to Nelson County to find records, land records and things, because it was Nelson County then. When you go over here to the clerk's office, their records and deeds don't start till like 1790s. Almost really the early 1800s is when their land records really start. This is a plat of Shepherdsville. Shepherdsville was formed on December 21st, 1793 by Adam Shepard. It was land that belonged to Adam Shepard. He came here around 1781. Adam actually surveyed over 10,000 acres in over 10 different counties in Kentucky. And he owned he claimed, because back then when you surveyed, you didn't get paid. There wasn't nobody paying you to come and survey. Your payment was you could claim the land that you surveyed, so he claimed it. And at one time, he had laid claim to over 70,000 acres of land. And he had surveyed all that in over 10 different counties. And Bullitt County, he had laid claim to a lot of Bullitt County, or a big portion of it, and part of that was what is now Shepherdsville. And he formed Shepherdsville, laid out the town, and then started selling the lots. And that's why Shepherdsville is named Shepherdsville after Adam Shepard. Bullitt County was established on January the 1st, 1797, and it was formed out of Jefferson and Nelson counties. Is that the end? Boy, I got through that quick, didn't I? Wow. Anybody have any questions? I'm going to be speaking about Adam Shepard in November at the Bullitt County Genealogical Society meeting. Adam Shepard was a pretty interesting guy too. I'll be having a presentation there.
What
Bull-
about Henry Chris?
Henry Chris, I've got a book over here about Henry Chris that Betty Darnell wrote. Henry Chris came to Bullitt County,
He was my fourth grandfather.
okay,
Or maybe third. His daughter was married to my great-grandfather.
Henry Chris' home, one of his homes, one of his stone homes actually still exists. You probably know that.
I've been there. I haven't
Yeah.
been in it because it's on private property,
Yeah.
but I've been there and took a picture of it,
Yeah.
yes.
He was a United States congressman. He was the one that got the first courthouse over here built. The first courthouse, the original courthouse in Bullitt County, was right in the intersection there of 61 and Joby Hall Avenue. Right in that, where that light is right there, right in the middle of those lights. That's where the first courthouse was. And he built that. He was responsible for getting that built. He was involved in county government. He was a pretty good character. Like I said, Betty Arnold, we've got a book over there.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be getting that for my birthday.
Are you? Well, we got a book. It's a little bit expensive, but Betty Darnell read it, and I've read the whole thing, and it's excellent. It's got all the genealogy in the back, and you can't go wrong with that one. But yeah, Henry Chris was one of the founders of this county. Benjamin Pope, Adam Shepard. And they all came in. A lot of them came in. And it was the salt that just brought everybody here and then that's what the county's main industry was. We had iron making. We've got the iron furnaces out of Belmont, and there's one out on Beach Grove Road. There's what's left of it. A lot of people have taken off with the stones, but there were 2 iron furnaces, and that was a big industry here in the early beginnings of Bullitt County, was the iron furnaces. Trying to think. But that pretty much covers the founding of Bullitt County and kind of how it came to be. I'm sorry, I didn't know I was going to go through it that
What about
way.
the gap in the knob right there that they're putting the new Preston Highway through? I wonder what the history of that little place was, and because when they're digging all that up, I'm thinking, I wonder what you could discover if you were shifting through all of that.
There used to be a train depot there. The train would stop at Gap in the Knob. There used to be a train that ran through there. There is a story. Well, it's not Gap in the Knob though. I don't know a whole lot of history. I don't know that there was a whole lot. There was a little community just down from Gap in the Knob was the what was it called? We got Brooks, but there was another little community there before you get to Brooks, in between Gap and the Knob and Brooks on 1020. There was another little community there, and there was a murder there. Charles Hartley wrote a book about that. There was a shootout and a murder at the depot there, train depot. Drawing a blank on the name of the community though. But as far as Gap and the Knob, I don't know a whole lot of history about that. Over here on Bullitt's Lick, we're talking about Bullitt's Lick and the Salt Works. At Bullitt Licks Baptist Church, there is a big knob right behind the church. You got the cemetery and that big hill goes up there. Well, there's a story that's in the Bullitt County Memories book about that knob, and about a gentleman that was up on, supposedly, according to some of the stories, was tortured by the Indians up there. He got captured and was taken up to the top of that hill and tortured by Indians. And that story's in one of the Bullitt County Memories books. And there's stuff in the Bullitt County memory books about Adam Shepard, about, I don't know if there's a story on Henry Chris, but there is about Adam Shepard. There is on the early formation of Bullitt County, Kentucky. Like I said, this green book has some good stuff. If you want to know more about Kentucky and how it was formed and the counties, this right here is a great book. It's called The Historical Atlas of Kentucky and Her Counties. And it was compiled by Wendell H. Rohn, R-O-N-E, Sr. And it's really cheap. It is a really good book. It has all these maps. Most of the maps I showed you are in here, and there's a lot more maps, pictures of the early courthouses. The first courthouse, and I think the first courthouse built in Kentucky was Harrodsburg, and that's in here. Frankfurt. It shows pictures of the first courthouses in Frankfurt, and I think Harrodsburg was where the first was at. But it's a great book, and that's where I got a lot of the information for my presentation was out of here. So that was one of the things, and then I want to mention, and I mentioned earlier, this too is a real good book. Has all the early history on the history and all the early ports. And
Yeah, we have that available in the library as well.
yeah, it's probably very good for
Maybe.
check out. And then I've got some over here. And then our Bullitt County's memory books, we've got the train wreck book. So, anybody else got any questions?
Well, I've always wondered what the Salt River was like back then before, I don't know, if it was bigger, if it was higher, or able to handle bigger boats, or...
No, reading the history, there were some boats that came down Salt River, but I don't think it was ever a whole lot bigger than what it is now. At one time, over here where the park is at, the city park, there was a dam. They actually had dammed up part of it, and we found, well, David, it was actually before I got involved with the museum, but David and them, they went over and actually found, they've got pictures, there's still these big steel stakes that are bent over kind of sideways, but these still big stakes that are in the ground, in the river where the dam used to be. And so it was dammed up at one time, so it might have been deeper than part of it anyway when they had a dam. But there's always been difficulty, but the Salt River was one of the main, back in the early 1700s, was the main transportation for people. They didn't have 65 or 61, they had to use the river, either the river or the old wagon trails, the Wilderness Road. And Salt River was, there was a little town called Pitts Point in Bullitt County, and it's on what is now Fort Knox and Pitts Point. That's the only way you could get, one of the only ways you could get to Pitts Point was to go by the river. And that's how people got back and forth from Pitts Point, was they used the river to go to and from. Because there wasn't no road, there was roads, but they were hard, and it was just quicker to get on a boat and go down the river and go down to Pitts Point. But that's a whole other presentation, Fort Knox and all the little communities that used to be there.
Was any battles fought in the Civil War in Shepherdsville?
Not battles. George Hunt Morgan came through Bullitt County. There's some stories where he stopped, and I know out in one in particular that I read out in Chappies, there is a big home called the Henry Trundle Home. It was built during the Civil War, before the Civil War, by slaves. And there's a story about, was a first-hand account by a young lady. She was a child at the time. It was a first-hand account of Henry Hunt Morgan coming, and he went to their house, and he actually took some of their horses and they had to feed them and everything. I think down there on the Salt River, down there at the park, again at the park, I think there was a small battle. I don't know if it was you call it a battle or a skirmish, but there was some Civil War battles down there. There are some historical markers about the Civil War right over there by the funeral home, by the American Funeral Home. I think there were some skirmishes. I wouldn't call them battles,
Yeah.
but there was some skirmishes here. I know the Confederates did burn they burnt the bridge over Salt River a couple times.
I've read that somewhere.
Yeah, they burnt the bridge over Salt River trying to keep, the Union from moving south. So, yeah, there was definitely some Civil War activity in Bullitt County for sure.
One of my grandfathers rode with the Hunt, and he actually died in a prison camp. And I don't know where it's way up north somewhere. It's Peabody Prison or something. But that house she's talking about, the Trundle House, is it the one that's by the Trundle Cemetery now over there at Shippies, or is it different?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, okay, I walk by that every day.
Yeah, it's actually for sale.
Yes,
I think
I'd love to have it. I would love to have it, but.
Yeah, we would too. It's
Yeah.
beautiful
Oh, wow.
inside.
Yeah, I would love to have it too. I've actually been in. I got the
Have you?
yeah, it's been several years ago, but I got to take a tour inside of it. It's beautiful. Yeah, it's something else to see. But yeah, I've been fortunate being involved with the Geological Society. I've been able to tour several houses here in Bullitt County. I've been able to tour the Benjamin Pope House. The Benjamin Pope House, let's talk about him. He came here. His house is over there behind Amazon off of Cedar Grove Road. His some of his ancestors still own that home. And what they did was they sold a bunch of their land to Amazon, but they told them, they said, we'll sell you the land with conditions. And the conditions is you got to maintain the cemetery, the family cemetery. You've got to keep it clean, and you've got to fence around it, make it look nice and maintain it. And you know, you're not going to get the house. You know, you're not going to get the part of the property with the original house. And so they did. If you go back there, cemetery's got a nice fence around it. But the house is still there, and it's a big 2-story house. But inside of that big 2-story house is the original log cabin that Benjamin Pope built. They built the cabin, and then they just built the rest of the house around it. So if you were to tear that house down and you were to get to that one section, you'd find the original log cabin. It's still actually part of that home that he settled in.
I love the history of old houses. I just love them. That's, I would like to tour inside of that Chris home.
Yes, I would too.
You've never been in it?
No, I haven't. We've got, there was a group, and it was before I got involved with the Geological Society, but a group from our society that got to go out and tour it. Over here at the museum in our research room, we actually have an album of pictures taken inside there, a bunch. So if you want to come by, that's available for you to look at. So I've seen those, but I've never actually been in it myself. There's a house right here, right across the street, that house was there during the 1917 train wreck. It was the home where, when the train wrecked, it was actually a hotel at the time, and when the train wrecked, they took a lot of the dead bodies and a lot of the injured, and they were over in that house, and they attended to them. The ones that were alive, they attended to them and tried to help them. That home is for sale, and we're worried about it. We don't know. We're afraid that it's going to get destroyed, but you know, we can't save them all. You know, we can't protect them all. But that's another one of our. It's probably that house over there. I can't say for sure, but I'm thinking it's probably one of the oldest houses in Shepherdsville.
It is.
Or pretty close to it. If not, it's pretty close. Can't rightly think of any house right off the top of my head that would be older than that one. But
When my sister and I was walking the other night, that Trundle house, behind it, there's an old fireplace that's still standing. And we was just picturing what it probably was. It was probably an outside kitchen, do you think, or a wash house?
It was an outside kitchen. The way it was told to me was that was the kitchen that the slaves used to. They would cook food, and that's what they used. So I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate, but that's what I was told.
Yeah.
And I was also told they're not there anymore, but there used to be a whole bunch of slave quarters behind the house. And if you go down the road from that house, back in there just a piece, there's another cemetery, and it's called the Bowman Cemetery, and it's where a lot of the slaves were buried. There are a few tombstones, but it's mostly unmarked graves, just rocks and stuff. But Tammy Ott, who lives right across from it, they've worked on cleaning it up, and they actually got a lady that donated several $1,000s, and they put a nice fence around part of it just to, so people would realize that it was there and everything.
Well, there's an old cemetery up there behind Claremont, behind the regular cemetery, Vine Hill Cemetery. There's one in the very back.
Yeah.
And I have a great-grandmother back there, and I wished I could get somebody to do something with it. It's overgrown that you can't even see her cemetery. I went through the winter months and got back in there, but there's several back there, and of course there's part of it is kind of clear.
Yeah.
I think there's some tunnels in there.
Yeah.
She was Angie Warden, but I don't know who would do it, but it really needs to be fixed, kind of like the Trunnels. They've cleaned that up and put a fence around it.
Well, we've got we estimate there's about 300 cemeteries in Bullitt County, and probably 75%, or probably more like 85%, are little family cemeteries. And they're on private property, and unfortunately there's no laws that make anybody do anything, and so it's up to the landowners.
I think Ben's Distillery owns this one now. I'm pretty sure.
Do they? I think I visited that one once with the cemetery committee.
You may have.
But I think that seemed like to me a few years ago, might have been Sheriff Timmel went back there and cleaned it some, because.
Like I say, there's a few a few headstones, but it's just pretty much one little area. It was probably just the tunnels
Yeah,
And the others around it
yeah,
is just overgrown.
yeah,
Like I said, I thought hers was covered up or something, but I did find it, but
yeah.
it was
That's
rough
good.
finding it.
Good, well, I'm glad you found it. Yeah, we spent a couple of years trying to document all the cemeteries in Bullitt County, and we documented around 150, but there's still a lot more, and we still need to do more work, but a lot of them are overgrown. I visited cemeteries that's in the middle of a cow pasture. One day we got there, and the cemetery was actually in the back of a cow pasture, and we got permission and everything. We were going through there, and I'm walking along, and I got this cow following me, and I keep looking at him, and I'm afraid he's gonna. But he thought I had a bag with me, so I think he thought I was gonna feed him. But after a while, he figured out he wasn't gonna get no food, so he left me alone.
Well, I have a family, I'll tell you this and I'll let you go because I know you got stuff to talk about. But my other ancestors, the Moores and the Critchlows and all those, there's a Moore cemetery on Pitts Point, but I don't know where it's at.
Yeah,
It's on private property too, but I know my fourth great-grandfather is buried
yeah,
there. So,
yeah. Back to the presentation just a little bit. When you talk about the formation of Bullitt County, and Kentucky, you've got these settlers coming in. Like I said, if you think about, just try to imagine yourself here where there's nothing, just woods. And I wish if I could go back into time, that's one of the things I would do is come here in the 1790s and just see what it looked like, because it would have been the early settlers, even when 1793 when they formed Shepherdsville, it was just a dirt road with some, cabins and log buildings, maybe some brick buildings or stone buildings, but for their businesses and stuff. But it wouldn't have been much, and it would just be so interesting to be able to go back in time and to see what it looked like and to be there. When we've got all these modern conveniences, computers and smartphones and televisions and radio, I can just imagine back then it would have been such a more peaceful time and place to be.
definitely.
They had their worries, they had their troubles. They had to get their crops in. If the weather was bad, then they didn't get their crops in, then be struggling to eat things. But still, to me, even with all the troubles that they would have had, I think it would have been a much more peaceful, much more easier time and place to live. You wouldn't have all this political junk that's going on today,
Yeah.
and all these things, all the worries that are things that we go through in this world. You hear on the news, police officers getting shot, other people getting shot, riots, and it's like that time period. You go back when there wasn't much here but a couple of cabins and some dirt roads, it would have been so much more peaceful.
We have some books that are not that old, and I wish I could remember the author, but they're called Frontiersmen, and it's sort of historical fiction, so it's a novel the way you read it, but it's the frontiersmen, I think, from Virginia that were coming in first exploring this area, and I hear they're really good. I haven't had a chance to read them, but we have them in the library.
Oh.
I think they're set in Kentucky, or
Yeah.
what would become Kentucky.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, I don't really have anything else unless somebody else got questions. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Can you tell us a little bit about the first, how Mount Washington came to be? Back when, was it in comparison to Shepherdsville, or who first may have started that?
I don't know. I have to be honest about that. I've not really researched Mount Washington too much. I know it wasn't originally called Mount Washington. I think it was originally called Mount Vernon, I think that's what it was called. I don't really know that much about Mount Washington, unfortunately. Lebanon Junction came to be because of the trains. They built the railroad tracks, and they had to set up some train depots and stuff in Lebanon Junction. And as a result of the railroad workers there, the town built up around that. And that's how Lebanon Junction came to be. We've got a book that Merlin Pike and Steve Maston wrote. I don't have it with me, but it's also available at the museum. It's called Railroad Town, and it's about the formation of Lebanon Junction and how it came to be. But it was a railroad town, and it was a result of the railroad. And it's back in its heyday when it was the main form of transportation, or one of the main forms of transportation was the railroad. That's kind of how Lebanon Junction came to be. And then the smaller communities, just kind of, we've got Hebron, Zonton, and Box Chase, Chappies, all these other little smaller communities came along. A lot of them came along in the 70s. Started popping up in the 70s. Some maybe before that, but no, I have to apologize about that. I haven't really studied Mount Washington that much. So, anybody else got any other questions?
Well, Daniel, I just want to thank you for coming in and doing the
Yeah, it was
presentation
interesting.
again. We had Daniel here a couple years ago for our history of slavery and segregation in Bullitt County. That was fascinating as well.
How much slavery actually went on in Bullitt County?
A lot.
A lot?
Bullitt County had, and I don't have the numbers right on my top of my head, but Bullitt County had a pretty good slave population. We even had a couple of people, Mr. Trunnell was one of them. We believe it's possible that one of his things, not only, he had a lot of slaves and he used them on his farm, but one of the things that were done back then was you bought slaves, you bought female slaves, and you paired them up with a male, and it didn't matter whether they were in love or not. You just paired them up, and then they would have kids, and then every child that they had, the slave owner would make money off that because he could sell them and he would make money. So they would do that as a way to make money, and we think that he might have been part of that. I don't know what the word is for it, but
Yeah.
We had slaves. We had a lot of big slave owners. Adam Shepard owned slaves. I think Henry Christ owned slaves. Mr. Trunnell owned slaves. There was a lot. There was definitely a lot. And the Trunnell home was built by slaves. Up in Hebron, the funeral home up there. It's owned partly by the Brooks family,
Yes.
Choppenhurst. That next to the funeral home, there's a big white house.
Yes.
That was built by slaves. I've gotten to tour that one as well, but that one was built by slaves. So there are 2 or 3 big homes in Bullitt County that still exist that were built by slaves. And so they definitely used slaves. They farmed slaves. Even after slavery ended, it was still a big struggle for them. They were sharecroppers, worked on farms of sharecroppers, and went through a lot in the 1780s, 1790s. It was very, very, people watch the news today and they see all this bad stuff happening. I just got done reading a book here a couple of months ago about slavery in Kentucky. And if we'd had CNN back then, what they would have been reporting on back then would have been paled in comparison to what we see on the news now.
Yes.
A lot of things that happen. A lot of the murders, lynchings, and things like that. It would have paled in comparison. So people say, oh, it's so bad out there today. But if you read history and you read what went on, you'll find that it was probably just as bad, if not worse, back then. If we had CNN 24-hour news service, it would be a lot worse what they'd be reporting. So, but most definitely slavery in Bullitt County.
I saw that the Bullitt County, I'm sure you know, the History Museum has a great website. And they have, there was one page at least, it was going down, just one document showing the number of slaves, and it had like the family name and how many slaves they had. And that was just one document that I remember seeing on the Bullitt County History Museum website.
Let me mention that real quick. The Bullitt County History Museum, as I said, is across the way there. We do have a great website. Charles Hartley maintains it, and it is awesome. There's tons and tons of information on there. Henry Christ, pictures, tons of pictures. There's a whole section on slavery. Most of it is my research. Some of it Charlie did. Patrick's talking about the slave schedules, the early slave censuses. Charlie's got a lot of that on there. All the black cemeteries are on there, the readings from the black cemeteries, black marriage records. But there's a lot of other stuff on there too. There's early, just for whites, people, the early birth records, actual birth certificate images, I think, are on there. We were actually fortunate. Somebody donated to the museum, I don't know, 20 or 30 birth certificates. They were in a tablet, printed tablet, and I guess somebody, a county official had these, and they hand filled them out, when somebody was born, and they kept them. I guess they didn't turn them over to the state or whatever. They kept them. Well, they got donated to us, and we scanned them all in, and I'm pretty sure those are on the website. And there's a lot of other neat stuff on there, a lot of old pictures from our archives. We've probably got 70,000 pictures on our computers archived over there, and we've got just a small portion of those on the website, but there's a lot of those on the website. So there's a lot of good stuff on the
stuff,
website.
huh?
Yeah, a lot of good stuff.
Oh, well, let me ask you this. Do y'all ever remember Dr. Baker that was around Shepherdsville?
Dr. Baker. That name's not familiar to me.
Well, I was reading a letter or a diary that my aunt wrote, and it was in 1932. And she had been to visit her grandfather's homestead, and Dr. Baker, the house was next to Dr. Baker's. I've never been able to find out anything about this side of my family, so I just figured if I could find out where Dr. Baker lived, maybe I could
Yeah.
find out the area anyway.
Yeah.
So.
The only Dr. Baker I know is Dr. Baker off Little House on Prairie.
Yeah.
I don't think that probably wasn't him.
Do you ever use the ancestry here at the
Yes,
library?
I have. Only thing I found out about the Stevensons is that they came from Virginia, or his family did, and I can't find anything out about my grandmother. I can find out where she got married, and of course when she was married to my grandfather. That's all I can find out.
Of course, the library has Ancestry. We have Ancestry at the museum that you can use for free. We also have access to Fold 3, which is more military records than anything, but we have access to that. And I think we also now have access to the Courier Journal, all of the back issues of the Courier Journal. You can actually search it, and then you can actually pull up the newspaper image, and then you can, if you just want like an obit or whatever, you can crop that down and print it out. And so it's pretty neat. I have it at home. I use it at home, but I think we've got access to that over at the museum, and that's all free. You just pay for your copies. And we've got volunteers there every day, and we're open whenever the courthouse is open. We're open, and the volunteers will be glad to help you. They're real nice, and they'll be glad to help you, with your research.
I know I stopped there and Mr. Strange helped me one day.
Yeah, David's great. David's great, and we've got family files. Like, I don't know if we've got a file on the Stevens, but you can check and see. There might be a family file with some information on that name.
And another, is there any photo that you know of Henry Chris?
No, I
have tried and tried. Even I thought, well, maybe
Yeah.
he was in the House of Representatives. Maybe they would have something or something like that. I've never
No.
been able to find a photo.
Did you go to the courthouse a few weeks back when they dedicated the
No,
marker?
I didn't know it.
Oh,
I
you
read it
didn't
in
know
the
it?
Pioneer.
Okay, well, I asked Betty Darnell the day we were there, I asked her about that. I said, is there not a picture of him somewhere? She said, no. She said, there's no known picture of him. And it's a shame, I would like to have a picture of Adam Shepard, and there's no known picture of him. Not a real picture anyway. So,
Well, I think his brother was married to one of my aunts.
yeah.
But,
From the time period they lived, I don't think photography had been invented, so it would be a painting.
yeah.
Somebody did a portrait, painting of a portrait painting, but yeah, it's a shame that we don't have an image of those
I know
folks.
it.
It really is.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you, Mr. Buxton.
Yeah, thank you very much.